Welcome in to the Lady Vol Basketball Fever podcast, part of Vol Basketball Fever. We're a show dedicated exclusively to talking about the Lady Vols and news around the program. Tune in to hear thoughts and discussions from experts who cover the Lady Vols on a daily basis. Now, here's a new episode of the Lady Vol Basketball Fever podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome in to another episode of the Lady Vol Basketball Fever podcast. I am Nathaniel Rutherford, joined by the wonderful Maria Cornelius of GoVols247, here to break down the ending of the Lady Vols season and also the beginning of the offseason, and a very important offseason for this team. Maria, thank you again for coming on here to talk about the ending of the season, and again, talking about roster construction and the offseason.
Basketball never stops. It slows down, thank goodness, for people like me. That certainly doesn't slow down for the coaches, but for people like me, it slows down just a little bit in the spring and summer, so I'll take it.
Yeah, I can't imagine being a coach because, like you said, it's a 24/7 even in the months of April, May, June, July. Like it does not stop for them. Before we get into it here, I want to thank all of you all for tuning in, whether it's on YouTube or if you're listening on your podcast app of choice. Thank you so much. We appreciate it if you haven't already subscribed to the channel or to subscribe to the podcast. Leave us a nice 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Google, either one, or Spotify, I guess I should say, on the podcast store. And like this video if you're watching on YouTube. We would really, really appreciate it. And you'll see more Lady Vol content and Vol basketball men's side as well content on the YouTube and on the podcast. Well, Maria, the season has come to an end. Last time we talked, it was the beginning of the Sweet 16, and we talked about kind of what needed to happen if Tennessee were to beat Louisville. Well, they didn't beat Louisville. They made it close, and they kept it close, and I think if they'd been fully healthy, I would have loved to have seen what this team could have done had Jordan Horston been healthy. Unfortunately, she was not. She could not play, or if they had Keegan Green. Like, if this team had been fully healthy, I would have loved to have seen that matchup, and I also think Lady Vols had really probably could have won that game if everybody was healthy, because they gave it a fight up to the end when Louisville was able to finally kind of pull it away there late. 76-64 was the victory for Louisville, and Tennessee's season ended in the Sweet 16. But it is a season that I think if you look at it as a whole, Maria, it's not, if you go back 15 years ago, this would not be considered a super successful season, not winning the SEC regular season title or tournament title, just getting to the Sweet 16. But this isn't 15 years ago. A lot's happened in the last 10 years to this program. This was the first time in 6 years that the Lady Vols made it to the Sweet 16. They were ranked in the top 5 at one point this year before injuries really kind of derailed the season a little bit. I wouldn't say even derailed, because they still managed to be a top 15, top 20 team for even after that happened. So just kind of took it off tracks a little bit. So to me, this season was a success. It's not a success maybe in the history of the Lady Vols in terms of, what the expectations are for the program, but from where the program had been and to where Kelly Harper and their staff took over the program and where it is now, I think this season was a success in terms of building things in the right direction. And we'll get to this more in a moment, but there is a lot of momentum around the program now, and probably the more momentum I've seen around the Lady Vols in several years. And I think that, to me, more than even getting to the Sweet 16, just the big positive momentum with this program paints this season as a success for me.
It was. I mean, I think you summed that up well. They did well. They overcame considerable issues with losing players, vital players in terms of injury. Ray Burrell, Marcus Juarez before the season even started, and of course Ray Burrell, then Keegan Green, then Jordan Horston, who unfortunately did not make it back to postseason. So I think all in all, Tennessee did very well and went about as far as they could go. Could they have beaten Louisville? Yes. Some more shots fall. Louisville missed a shot here or there, a couple more possessions. But I mean, props to Louisville. They're Final Four team, so I don't want to act like, oh yeah, Tennessee could have won that game. Tennessee could have won any game it played this year, but in this case, I don't think any Tennessee fan, or at least the majority, don't look back and feel good about this season and where this program is going.
Yeah, and what does it say about the resiliency of this team when you look at not just the, overcoming injuries and kind of how far they went, but you look at the tournament, every single Final Four team Tennessee played this year. Obviously, Louisville, they played in the tournament, but you played South Carolina because they're an SEC school, so you play them every year. They played UConn, and they played, wow, I just forgot who UConn played. Yeah, I'm sorry, but it was Stanford. Yeah, so they played Stanford too. It's like you look at the schedule for the Lady Vols, they played every Final Four team. Like that is crazy. Like that is a ridiculously tough schedule, and that's not even throwing in the fact that you look at the other NCAA tournament teams they played. Obviously, not just in the SEC, but a USF, a UCF, other programs like that at Texas, for example, too. I mean, it was not only did you have injuries, but you had a really one of the tougher schedules the Lady Vols have had in a while, I think, and still managed to be a consistent top 20, top 15 team, and still managed to go further in the postseason than you had in over half a decade. So I think that I really wish that they could have stayed healthy. And I really, I think last time we talked about, you had you on the podcast, I said, you're talking about fingers crossed that next year, somehow, some way, this staff can have a healthy roster from start to finish, or as healthy as you can be from start to finish in a season, because that's not been the case like ever since Kelly Harper's been here. That they've had some sort of injury that has been a blow to the team at some point every year that Kelly Harper's been here. And I think that it's not a poor reflection of the strength and conditioning, because they've been just kind of a lot of times kind of freak accidents that have just happened in games a lot of times. Or in Marta's case, it happened before the season started.
Her arm jumped on. Right, I mean, there's really nothing you could do about that. Kian, she felt it as she went up. She knew she had torn the ACL the minute she pushed off that leg. She felt it. So, and then Marta was a stress fracture that still needed help. She'd done one surgery, didn't take. Stress fractures are quite tricky, so they took the very conservative approach and basically shut her down.
Yeah, and
now she'll come back with a full year of rest. So, yeah, if I have said I'm always the pump the brakes kind of. All right, come on, people. The expectation, don't have it up here when it should be here. Mm-hmm. But if they stay healthy, this is a team that is could be a Final Four favorite. I mean, if they have all their pieces, you look at what Kelly did last season as a coach, or this past season, to get that team to a Sweet 16. And she did it with having to play 4 freshmen, a considerable amount of time, an elevated role for a sophomore, and their best player out from February 17th on. And I told everybody who said, well, Tennessee, that's not the expectation of Tennessee. I said, I know. I said, but I want you to look at every Final Four team, take their best player off of it, and tell me if they make that Final Four.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Or and like that, and take their best backup post player, or basically their best bench player, take that off their team and see how far they go too. And Tennessee was without both those pieces in postseason play. They didn't have Kean Green or Jordan Horston. Obviously, like you said, Marta had been out the whole year, but like it's one thing to, you take off the best player who literally was leading your team in scoring, rebounding, and assists. Like she was doing everything for the team, and steal. Like I mean, take that off, and then you also throw in the fact that you had some pretty good depth there with Kean Green behind Tamari Key, but then once she goes out, you're having to put in a true freshman most of the time as your backup post player, and it's I will talk more about her in a second, but I thought Caroline Strickland did well as the kind of year went on, and when she was thrust into more of a role, she I think stepped up, especially in the SEC tournament and NCAA tournament. But like, it's not an ideal situation, and I know that you could say, well, they had an easier path, like who they played in the NCAA tournament. I mean, the mid-major teams they played were 2 really good mid-major teams too. Belmont and Buffalo were Belmont took down Oregon. So I mean, yeah.
Buffalo in the first round, that didn't. I mean, you didn't used to have first round games like that. Yeah. And Buffalo really deserved a better draw. I think a better draw. They're on to the second round. I mean, yeah, they beat Belmont, but people forget, hey, Belmont beat Oregon.
Right. Yeah, when I had Cora Hall on here from the Knox News, she was talking about all the mid majors and stuff in the NCAA tournament. And she said, Oregon and Tennessee reminded her kind of a lot of each other, where they're capable of playing really well, but they also have games they're kind of off. And she said, Oregon can't afford to have one of those off games because Belmont's good enough to beat them. Lo and behold, Belmont beats them because Belmont can be really good from 3, and we saw that kind of keep them in the game against Lady Vols. So I don't want to rehash all of that because you and I talked about that last time we had you on. But again, I do think this season was a successful one for Tennessee, and I think moving into kind of off-season talk here, that leads into a lot of momentum for this team, even before there was the roster additions of Jazz Powell and Rickea Jackson, of course, Justine Pissat as well, who has been signed for a while. But Maria, I look at Ray Burrell going to the NBA or WNBA draft, not a surprise. I think before we kind of talk about some of the offseason stuff, I do want to say congratulations to her because she's being invited up to New York for the WNBA draft, and that usually means you're going to go. Usually means you're going to go in the first round, and you're obviously going to be featured. So I do want to mention that really quick, and have you talk about it too, because I think that's fantastic for Ray, and I think it's really good because I was really concerned about the injury she had and whether or not that would really affect her draft stock and how scouts viewed her. But clearly with this invite to New York, I think it means that they're still very much having her in high regard. And I saw a couple of kind of WNBA mock drafts. One of them had her going number 9 to the Sparks, and I thought that'd be kind of interesting to see her go that over to LA over there. But I think it very, very happy for her that she gets to go up to New York for the draft.
Yeah, she earned that right, and I'm happy for her too. She could have left easily. I mean, she was the only one in her class to get to senior day, and you have to applaud that she stuck it out. She gave Kelly a chance, and she had an outstanding junior season. I mean, she certainly showed what pro scouts are looking for. Can you get better? And she clearly got better. She was clearly coachable, and I think her coming back and having such an outstanding postseason, I think elevated her in that draft because you could see, all right, yeah, she's getting back to what we had seen before. So good for Ray, and she was ready to go, and I get it. I certainly understand players that don't want to stay in college 5 years. I think you'll see some little bit of adjustment in play now. When you go back and look at some of the rosters and not just mid-majors, but Power Fives, you had some 23 and 24-year-old players on these teams. I mean, some players have been in school 5, or if they had a redshirt year or an injury year, 6 years. That experience is going to come back down to earth a little bit. And some of these 18-year-olds aren't going to be looking across the court at a 23-year-old and trying to figure out how to play them because you're older, you're stronger, you're wiser. And there are a lot, and Tennessee was one of them. I mean, Alexis Dye was a tremendous addition to Tennessee this year, but that's not going to happen as often now. That's gonna start rolling back a bit.
Yeah, you make a great point because there still will be experienced teams. It was kind of an extreme this year because some teams would have, like you said, multiple kind of super seniors or people who were taking advantage of the COVID year, and I think you still have the COVID year stuff. But you're right, it won't be nearly as prominent, I don't think, this next season as it was this year. So that's a very good point. That I don't think there's ever been as much of an age gap between new players and the veterans that there were this year. So that won't be as much. It'll be more back to what we're used to, where there's only like 4 years separating, maybe at the biggest, a 5-year gap between the youngest player and the oldest player. But yeah, that's a very good point. And like you said, Lady Vols took advantage of that with Alexis Dye. And I'm very happy that she had the finish to the season she did. Talking about before you move on to looking at the future, because Dye had Alexis Dye in March is again just a fantastic, like she hits a different level when she gets into March. And the last time we talked about how she had like 4 or 5 straight games of double figure points and about a double in every one of those games almost too. I was very happy to see her close out strong because she deserves it. She's seems like a really just phenomenal human being as well.
No, I agree. And yeah, I hope she gets drafted or can get into training camp. And but if not, and she wants to pursue it, I mean, she can continue a good career overseas. There are plenty of former Lady Vols that have kept going overseas and just keep doing well, keep making some money in the game. And, they want to do it as long as they can because it's hard. It's hard to give up a uniform when that's all you've known your whole life is wearing a uniform, playing somewhere. And you want to keep that going as long as you can.
Well, Maria, let's shift focus here and look at the future because as I've just mentioned there, like the future, in my opinion, is very bright for this program. And that's due in part because of what happened this past year, but also due in part because of some of the roster additions that have already happened with the signing of 5-star Justine Pissat, with the transfer in of point guard Jazz Powell and the transfer in of forward Rickea Jackson. The other, I think, roster movement that's happened since you and I last talked was Emily Saunders going into the transfer portal for the Lady Vols. And I don't think I don't have any intel. If anyone has intel of you, but you and I were talking beforehand, and there's not really a name to attach out there for the Lady Vols. But I don't think they're done adding players to the roster. And we were talking about where there's kind of the most help that's still needed on the roster, and that is in the post, because as you were saying, like, they have wings, like they are a very deep and talented team at the wing position. They have really good forwards as well. But who can be that person who can spell Tamari Key? Who can be the other five? Because this year you had to put in down the stretch, you had to put in Caroline Strickland there at that backup five. I think she's more of a natural four, just from her play and just kind of how she plays and her size and everything. I didn't think she did bad as a five, but I think that's the area where I would hope the Lady Vols can go grab someone out of the portal who, can be a Kean Green, or maybe even a step further than what Kean Green was. But Maria, these additions, I will talk about in a second about kind of what the roster could look like from the starting five to the bench and stuff, because it's going to be interesting. But I think that's the one area that if they can go get that right post player, my goodness, this team next year is going to be scary. I think the only other team in the SEC that'll be better than them is South Carolina, and obviously they just won a title, and they look like they're going to be loaded again next year too. So the only other team I'd put ahead of them in the SEC for sure is South Carolina, but there aren't that many other teams, period, other than South Carolina, I would put ahead of this Tennessee team, assuming health and all that stuff, and assuming they get another post piece, because I think that's the one thing they still need as a good post option behind Tamari Key.
I think that is certainly what you would, if Tennessee were to make any more moves. And one thing I've been telling people too is Tennessee made their portal moves early.
Mm-hmm.
They got their point guard, they got Rakia Jackson, and now the portal is just, it's like that, that ride at the fair, that twirl-a-whirl or whatever, where you just sort of, it's just every time you look up, there's somebody else in it. Now, I do want to point out sometimes I've often said too that not every player in the portal is in the portal voluntarily. That some players, maybe the scholarship wasn't renewed, or whatever the exit interviews, the end of season interviews, however that discussion went, maybe didn't go well. Maybe it was mutually agreed upon that somewhere else would be better. So I sometimes hear people talk about all these players all just want to leave. I'm like, well, in some cases, they're in the portal not necessarily by choice. In other cases, and people don't realize this, if you're trying to become a graduate student, you may not always get into the graduate school of your choice, and that could even be the school you're currently playing for. So you may have to become a graduate transfer to get that fifth year at another school. So it is not by any means just players flooding into the portal. There are some situations clearly where a player could find an opportunity for more playing time somewhere else. And that, Emily Saunders can definitely help a team in the paint.
Mm-hmm.
And she's done what she was to do here. She's liked by her teammates. It's an amicable departure. She graduated in 3 years, or will graduate in 3 years. And she can move forward and if she wants to spend 1 or 2 seasons and playing at another school. I didn't get any impression that there was any ill will or anything, and that's what you want. And as of now, that appears, you never say never, because things can happen in April and May. But as of now, that's the only Tennessee player that entered the portal.
Yeah, you make a good point, because you look at I was talking with somebody of all fans on Twitter, like you looked at the I think ESPNW's like way too early top 25. They had Maryland at number 5, and I was like, they need to wait a little bit before they put these out, because now Maryland's like their whole team's in the portal at this point. So like they're not gonna be, they may not even be a top 25 team when it's all said and done. Like you mentioned, like the portal has been. I talked about it with Gene on the podcast we did on Wednesday. Like, as crazy as it's been in the men's game, I think the women's game has been even crazier this offseason. So already with the transfer portals additions and just this last 2 or 3 weeks, especially this week, there's been a ton this week.
Yeah, and it's not over. It goes through the whole month of April. So I think Tennessee is in a position of strength. One, it got the 2 players that can definitely help. Not just these are not support role players coming in. These are going to be players who will play a significant number of minutes. Who starts, I don't know. Kelly will figure that out in the fall. But they will be two players who will be vital pieces of Tennessee's 2022-23 team. The coaches then, I mean, there's 14 on the roster right now, and the max you can have scholarship wise is 15. Now, Edie Darby's a walk on. I do know from experience, and Pat tried it one couple of years to have full rosters out to the 15, and then she said never again. It's too many, particularly if all 15 think they should be playing. That gets tricky. Now, if you've got some role players or some players who are willing to wait their turn, who realize, okay, I'm not going to play that much year 1 and 2. I'm going to get ready. But with this portal, you're probably going to start seeing fewer players like that who are willing to wait and willing to play limited minutes. And so you're going to have role players. That's why players like Kean Green were so valuable. She knew her role. She embraced her role. So the fact that Tennessee could use help in the paint is I mean, everybody knows that. I mean, that's not even one of those things that you debate. Everybody knows that. Mm. I don't want to sell Caroline Strickland short at all, because I mean, she really showed in the last two or postseason really what she could do. I mean, the door's open for her to have a monster offseason and get ready to have a much bigger role next year. Then you look at, okay, who's in the portal? I mean, really good post players. I read this on our message board over at 247 on the Summit. You know, good post players don't grow on trees. They're a rare breed. Everybody wants them. So it's not like you're not fighting over a small pool of players a small pool of players, and a lot of schools want them. I mean, 2023, I mean, Tennessee's number one post player, it's clear. It's Aaliyah Del Rosario, the 6'6" post. Now, she's playing in Bell Buckle, Tennessee, so they list her as Nashville. It's really, I think Bell Buckle's about 50 miles from Nashville. She's from the Bronx originally, and she's there. It's a boarding school. She's there. So I've heard people say, well, Tennessee needs to keep in-state kids. I'm like, I really think she probably identifies more as a New Yorker than a Tennessean. But with that said, I mean, that appears to be Tennessee's number one post target right now. And if I'm a 2023 post and I'm looking at that roster, even if they bring somebody in through the portal, could be 1 year, 2 years max, probably. I'm thinking, boy, that door is wide open at Tennessee if I'm a post player, because Tamari Key is headed to the WNBA after one more year. So, and this team could have two or three. Well, I mean, if you count Jordan Horston, Tamari Key, Rakia Jackson, you're looking at almost. I mean, all of those will be first round picks. Heck, they could all be top 5, top 6 picks. I mean, the next year's draft is loaded. Will be loaded absolutely to the extreme. So
yeah, and loaded with Lady Vols too. I mean, to be honest, like you said, 3 of those 3 players, assuming that especially Tamari takes another step forward like she has every year, like she's a top 10 pick, like easy. Jordan Horston, she stays healthy, top 10 pick, easy. I think Rakia, with her skill set, is also potentially a top 10 pick, because I've watched like her film and things she did at Mississippi State. The way she's able to move and cut to the basket, like she has a dynamic play about her that I really like. And that leads me into talking about the roster here. You mentioned Strickland, and yeah, to me, it's no knock against her at all. I just think personally that she's a better fit as a 4 rather than as a 5. It's like, I think you're right. Like, she's in line for a big off season, regardless of if the Lady Vols go add another post from the transfer portal or not. But again, you mentioned, like, you know, the starting 5 and everything is for the coaches to figure out between now and November and into December. But I mean, it's a good problem to have, because I look at that and I'm like trying to figure out, okay, who's going to start and who's going to come off the bench, because you look at this past year, you end up playing the freshmen, I think, more than you expected, or I guess kind of more than you wanted, because you were hoping that you'd have healthy players that you wouldn't have to play the freshmen as much as you did, but then also gave them a lot of experience. And as sophomores, I think you really like what you're going to have in some of these players, like with Strickland, but also you look at with Brooklyn Miles especially, but Kai Wynn had a lot of flashes of potential. Sarah Puckett for sure, you know, had a really good freshman season as well. I think, you know, Tess Darby was a sophomore this past year, showed some flash and had a really good 3-point shooting season. But man, I look at potentially what is a starting five, what does a kind of a rotation of 8 or 9 look like next year, Maria, and it's pretty impressive. It's pretty daunting for an opposing team because I would expect both your new transfer additions, Jazz and Rickea, both to start because Jazz Powell is a true point guard, and Leval that was one thing they really missed this year too. Credit to Jordan Walker, she did a really good job coming in as you mentioned, like was a shooting guard beforehand and was asked to play the point guard, and she did a really good job of it for that not being her natural position. Now you have a natural point guard, so I imagine Jazz is going to start. Rickea is too, as long as she's healthy, she's too talented, in my opinion, to not start unless there's some issue there. And I've talked to her, had her here on the show, and if you haven't seen that, you can go back and check it out. I don't think there's going to be any personality issue. She seems, I love her personality, so I don't think there's going to be any clash there, so I don't think that's going to be a problem. So I think you have those two starting. I think obviously Horston and Key are going to start. The only other question I have is, who starts at that, 2 spot. And I would imagine it would be, Jordan Walker, because she's been very talented and has done a really good job her other 2 years here at Tennessee. So then it leads into, who's the first player off the bench? Sarah Puckett is obviously an option, but you look at some of the younger players there. I also just wonder, what happens with Marta Suarez? Because I think it's unfortunate for her for the injuries and the surgery she's had to have, but where does she fit into all this? Because she's very talented. She was a projected starter for this team this year. I like her play and I love her attitude. Where does she fit in? Because I think she's potentially, that 6th or 7th player that, in the rotation, one of the first 2 players off the bench, as long as she's healthy, because she has a lot of potential. There's just a lot of options on this team, and that's not a bad thing. It's just really an intriguing kind of starting 5 and a rotation of 8 or 9 that you could potentially have this year.
It sets up an one, nobody's going to get comfortable in that starting lineup. You're going to have competition, and that as a coach, that's what you want. You do not want complacent players that are starting because they know there's not many options behind them. And Tennessee has suffered through several seasons, not so much. You need to start because freshmen can start. I'm not saying there aren't freshmen that aren't ready to start. I've seen plenty of them. But you need to earn that right to start, not because it's by default. It's like you're the best option we have. Any freshman Justine Passat, obviously that's a competitive kid.
Yeah, she's going to come in. She's going to be in the rotation too, probably.
She's going to come in, and her goal will be a starting position. She's built like that. She's a 6'4" unicorn that can shoot to 22 feet. She's an intriguing person to watch in terms of now you got to get used to everything about college will be new, from sleep patterns to study to class. Now she went to a pretty tough private school, so she's ready for that part of it. But college is just different. You're not at home with mom and dad anymore, and it's just now you're on your own, and you got all that to adjust to. But the young players coming in now, like a freshman like Justine, that is an ideal situation because you are surrounded by veterans. And like Jordan Horston, Tamari Key, they had to start as freshmen, and there was I don't think there was a 4-year player on the roster, maybe one.
Making a point, yeah.
And so they were forced to not only be freshman starters, but they didn't really have veterans to look to for guidance and experience. And so I'm not saying they both could have started anyway as freshmen, even if they had upperclassmen there. But Kelly's got a totally different roster than her first 3 seasons here in terms of depth and talent. And she has the good thing, and because you always wonder, how do you manage a roster of that size? Kelly will play a lot of people. And she has shown that even when she didn't have a lot of roster depth, she wants to develop she says, I need to develop players. She thought it was even more important in COVID because you never know when you'd have COVID players out. And she also seems to have, even though she was someone who played many, many minutes all throughout her career, she seems to have a special regard for the players that put in all that work and barely get to see the court. She's trying to hunt minutes for everybody on the roster when she can. Now, is that going to be harder with 14? Absolutely.
Yep.
If it stays 14, it could go 15, but she also wants to play fast. Kelly wants a up-tempo speed and a pressing team, and you need bodies for that. You can't play 5, 6, 7 rotation and press 94 feet the majority of the game. You're going to give out.
Yeah.
And she wants to run on offense. I mean, she knows she's got snipers at the arc now. She's got scores inside. I think the biggest one who will benefit from Jasmine and Rakia there goes the dog, getting here is Tamari. I mean, you cannot, with those players there, I mean, Rakia can shoot threes too. Jasmine can shoot threes. Justine Passat, we know, can shoot threes. Jordan Horston can shoot threes. Marta Suarez can shoot threes. Tess Darby has shown it. You can't collapse on Tamari. You can't sag in on her like you can now and just surround her with players, because Tamari, I don't know, I'm trying to yell over the dogs, is a fantastic passer. Tamari will find that open player. So you swarm her and she's going to hit that sniper at the arc. So they're going to be fun to watch, but you just, God, what is that saying? Lord willing and the creek don't rise. Just please, no more torpedo hits to play. I think I was looking at stats. I may be wrong on this, but she's up there high. I think Jordan Horston still led the team in points scored, even though she missed so many games.
It's funny, I had the stats pulled up because I was looking at the minutes per game. She just barely, like Tamari and Alexis are right behind her, but yeah, she had 372 points. Tamari finished with 356 and Alexis with 347. So yeah, she still finished with the point lead for the team. And the minutes, not minutes played lead, but the minutes per game. I was looking, as no player, you mentioned playing players not having a bunch of minute allocation. No player played more than, played over 30 minutes per game. Horston was close. She played 29.3. But you're right, like, Kelly showed, and obviously, like, if you watched games, you saw, like, getting players in, especially later on in the season when you had injuries and you get a lot of freshmen in there. But Horston played 29, Ray played 26, Tamari played 26, Alexis played 23, Jordan Walker played 27. You look at the bench minutes. Actually, I guess Tess Darby started too, but she played 22. Sarah Puckett played 21. Keegan Greed played 14 and a half. Brooklyn Miles played 19 and a half. As the season went along, Caroline played more, played 7. Kai Wood played 8. So, like, that's a lot of, like you mentioned, like a lot of minutes per game for a lot of players. Like, that's not just you have like 3 players playing 32, 33 minutes per game and then, some other minutes being distributed there. That's everybody getting a share in there, basically. And that's why you make a good point that I fully expect that to be the case this next season, because for one, they're going to be more talented depth than you've ever had, and two, that just has been the MO of Kelly Harper so far at Tennessee, is that she will play her bench, because like you said, you never know, and it benefited this year. You got those freshman minutes early on in the season, and you needed them in key situations later on in the year. So like it paid off for you by the time you got into February and March, because they had played already in December and January. And not just in mop-up minutes, but like an actual meaningful game time as well. So it paid off for them in the long run this past year, and I think it'll pay off for them this year too. Kind of looking ahead a little bit, you'd already kind of mentioned some 2023 a name there in the post for Lady Vols, their kind of top post target. That's another thing too, is that another way to build off this momentum, because we haven't really talked about it, but I mean, the expectations for next season are going to be sky high. They're going to be, not just getting to the Sweet 16, or maybe probably not even just getting to the Elite 8, but Final Four, I think is I don't know that I personally am thinking that, but I don't fault anyone for saying it, because you look at the roster construction, again, as long as you're healthy, we just talked about, you have 3 potential top 10 draft picks on the roster. That's the type of talent that the South Carolinas, the UConns have had, and obviously those are teams that have consistently been making the Final Fours over the last 10, 15 years. Well, I guess UConn's case, South Carolina's been more like 8 to 10 years, but still, like, that's the type of roster talent that makes deep runs in the tournament. So not only building off that and building off, hopefully meeting those expectations for next year, but Lady Vols are in on a lot of 23 kids. And I think there had been questions about, how well can Coach Harper recruit in the SEC. And I think what she has done in the 22 class and with the transfer portal has kind of silenced a lot of those questions. But I think if you really want to really silence even the most staunch of critics about what can you do in recruiting, this 23 class is key, because this 22-23 season is going to be the best opportunity this staff has had to go win and win big. And I think the 23 class could be, that's going to be the key to, can we maintain this success moving forward? And you and I were talking before we started recording Lady Vols are in on a lot of big names, and if they can land just a couple of them, that's going to be a top 10, top 5 type of class for UT in the 23 class.
And the 25s, I mean, they're in on 25s, 26s, and 27s too. And there's some outstanding players. I mean, there's women's basketball, girls basketball before it gets to college level is gotten so much better. I mean, there are just kids who can play now at very young ages. You look at. I'm not going to do the math because rosters numbers change so much year to year, but you're looking at Tennessee taking 3 to 4 2023s, and Kelly, as we have discovered, is very deliberate in how she recruits and very methodical. She knows what she's not just chasing stars, by 5-star, 4-star. She's not just chasing rankings. I mean, Justine Passat's a great example. When Kelly went to see her, I don't think she was top 75 because she played for a smaller program up at the Shore Shots up in the Northeast. Kelly went to see her in Pittsburgh at some small gym. I mean, I'm sure there were other coaches there, but probably not a whole lot. And she walked out of there saying, I want her. I want this kid. And so she has proven, one, that she can evaluate talent. Now, Justine escalated, all of a sudden Tennessee's looking at her. Other people start watching her. Suddenly now she finished number 11 in high school, but was she really like the number 75 player or whatever the 2 years? No, she was a lot better than that, but she just hadn't been seen. So obviously Kelly's not paying attention to what some, self-anointed prognosticators or think about rankings. Good, God bless him for trying. It's an inexact science to say the least. So, but the players they are looking at in 23, there's a lot of top ranked players. I mean, they're in that top 10, top 25, top 50. I would say they would hope to sign about 3 to 4 out of 23. And I mean, they're on track. If they get most of who they're targeting, I mean, it's a top 5 class without a doubt. The other thing that has happened here that is very good for Tennessee. Tennessee's a hot ticket right now because there were question marks about Tennessee and what would Kelly do and then you had the disruption of COVID, which is particularly difficult for Tennessee, a program that needs the NCAA tournament and needs Kelly to be out recruiting. Suddenly it was all shut down. She couldn't even, leave Knoxville to recruit. And nobody could come here. And yes, that affected every program, but it's even more difficult when you've just completed your first season at Tennessee and all of a sudden all the shackles are put on you and you cannot do anything except recruit on Zoom or FaceTime. So they have seen how Tennessee has played. I mean, Tennessee finished 3rd again in the SEC in a very competitive conference. They got to the semifinals of the SEC tournament. They got to the Sweet 16. And then they got Rickea Jackson. And I know maybe people say, well, why is that so impactful? She's a national name. Mm-hmm. She is a splendid talent. She's got over 1 million TikTok followers. I don't even know how you do that, but shout out to her.
I didn't realize that. Wow.
But on top of all of that, I mean, she is one outstanding basketball player. I mean, she is an SEC-type player of the year. She's an all-SEC-type player. She's an outstanding talent, one of the best players to ever come out of the state of Michigan. So that recruits are impressionable, to say the least. Young people are impressionable. And all of a sudden, Rickea Jackson not only picks Tennessee, but she picks Tennessee over Texas and LSU with 2 of the best recruiters in the game, Vic Schaefer and Kim Mulkey. That turned a lot of heads. And I think a lot of players with this portal, this is just back channel things of what I'm hearing. Some of this portal, too, are players leaving situations that are really poor fits for them as a player. I'm not criticizing teammates or coaches or programs. For whatever reason, it's not working out. The team chemistry is not there. The team fit is not there. Tennessee's had teams like that, and the portal ended up blowing them up. When you're bringing in that players like that together, there has to be a good fit. And Pat Summitt was one of the experts at finding those fits and letting her own players after a recruit was on an official visit, she'd go find the players because they do things outside of the coaches. They do things together. And she goes, okay, honestly, tell me, what do you think? And she's had teams shoot down some recruits, and because they didn't like the way they interacted with the team or how they would fit into the team and kids they'll find this stuff out about each other when they talk. And Kelly takes that same approach. She's walking around with that blueprint. She has that famous blueprint. I've never seen it, but probably got recruits' names all over it, so you can't see it. But she's got a blueprint, literal blueprint she spreads out on the table for recruits about what she wants to do and where you fit and how you, like a depth chart and who would play where and that's Justine Passat. I think Sarah Puckett, when she saw that blueprint, she was sold. I remember talking to her parents, and they were letting Sarah make up her own mind, but privately, they looked at each other and they go, "Good, please let her pick Tennessee." But they stayed out of it. But that was what they wanted after Kelly's visit. So you turn Kelly loose, you get her in these living rooms. She can close, she can close deals in there. And now she's got Samantha Williams, who is an incredible evaluator of talent and knows everybody in the game, has every AAU club program connection there could possibly be. And then Joy McCorvey, she's young enough to still relate to the players, a very driven player, very energetic coach, has helped Tamari Key immensely with her game. So Tennessee right now is in a position of strength. And I'll tell a quick story about Mickey DeMoss. Everybody knows Mickey DeMoss was Pat's recruiting coordinator, was responsible for getting Shamiqua Holtzclaw here. And she was with Pat for years and then went off, and she was head coach at Kentucky and then ended up being an associate head coach at Texas. And she came back for 2 seasons when Pat was sick. She did not know Pat was sick, but Pat had an opening and brought Mickey back. And I was talking to her, because I hadn't, she hadn't been around the program in years. And probably at that point it would have been, when did she leave? 2002, I think, 2003, somewhere right in there, 2002 or 3. So she had come back like 7 years later and had been at other schools. And I said, and she was back to doing the recruiting. I said, what's the difference coming back here? And I'll never forget what she said. She said, Tennessee doesn't recruit. Tennessee selects. And she goes, and now I can select again. And Tennessee is getting back to that position of where, okay, we select this one and this one. That's who we want. And I don't know how many players back during the Pat era, they turned down that wanted to come here because they had selected the ones that, they wanted. Now, I'm not saying you don't make mistakes. I mean, Tennessee missed on recruits. There's always mistakes out there. But Tennessee's getting back to that place where they're selecting and not just recruiting. And Kelly is very clear on what she wants and how she wants this program to go. And I've also heard that players are picking up on the vibe at Tennessee. One, you didn't have wholesale transfers out of here. That's a good sign. 2, I mean, they can watch benches. They can see players. They can see team chemistry. You can't hide that stuff from teenagers. And on their visit, they can watch all that. And I'm not saying that Tennessee doesn't have any friction or there's going to be drama with every team every season, men, women. That's part of sports. But they can see that these players genuinely care for each other and support each other. And if any coach can keep a large roster happy, it'll be Kelly. And then the reality of it is the transfer portal's here to stay, and Kelly's aware of it, and she's adapting to it like every other coach. You have to be prepared that you can have players go in it, and you have to be prepared every spring to get players out of it that you want to come to your program. I do think strategic use of the portal is beneficial for a team. I don't think overhauling your roster every year is going to be beneficial at a college level. It's even tough in the pros when you try to mix all of that. The college level, I think it's even harder. These are not free agents, even though it's almost treated like free agency. These are still young, emerging adults, and they are looking for an environment and a culture and a fit. And I mean, the college years, I mean, they're some of the best years of your life. That's what you want them to be. And you want to feel that connection to your college and your coaches and your teammates. And just school hopping is not going to do that for you. And so I think your more successful programs will be ones that don't have to have 5, 6, 7, 8 transfer players every year to keep your roster whole. And I just think that's a tough way to go to build team chemistry, to build that team unity that you need. The 2 or 3, yeah. I mean, I can see every team having 1, 2, maybe 3 every year. That the portal is a recruiting tool. It's not just spring recruiting, summer recruiting, fall visits, winter visits. No, it's recruiting. The portal is another recruiting season, and you never know who's going to be in it.
Yeah, and that kind of leads me. I have 3 things here before I had a question kind of building off that for you. One was you were talking about the blueprint thing. I remember watching an interview. I wish I could remember who it was with, but I think you and I had actually talked about it a month or so ago after I'd watched it, but it was with Justine. And she mentioned the blueprint thing. That was an interview, like a one-on-one with her, talking about her journey to, through high school and then becoming, committing to Lady Vols and why she chose Tennessee. And that was one of the things she mentioned was like when she's on the visit there, they literally laid out that blueprint. It was like mapping things out. And she's like, my parents and I were blown away by that. So I remember that specifically being mentioned by Justine as a big reason why she chose Tennessee. And another reason why, talking about the transfers choosing Tennessee, Jazz Powell mentioned, she specifically cited the culture. And then Rakia, I don't think specifically said culture, but she talked about like teammates being everything for her. And she saw how the teammates reacted, to each other with Tennessee. And Jazz also mentioned that being a huge factor on her visit here to Tennessee was, how everybody interacted. And she's like, I was greeted at the airport. She's like, I don't think I was greeted at the airport by any other visits. Like I was greeted there by Coach Harper. And like, she's like, she just gushed about kind of how the family feel was for the Lady Vols. And also you mentioned, this goes back to an earlier point you had about wanting to play up tempo. That was another thing Jazz mentioned about, one of the things Coach Harper told her was like, she was like, she wants to run. She wants to play with a faster tempo. And she thinks I could fit in that. And she's like, and I'm excited about that because that's how I want to play. So yeah, she wants to play more up tempo. Jazz mentioned that was the reason why that she chose Tennessee and why she thinks she's a good fit here. So I just wanted to get those 3 things off my head because I was like, you made points I wanted to go back to really quickly before I build off that point you made about recruiting and the transfer portal, because you mentioned you think Lady Vols take, this will be kind of last point we make here before we wrap up. You said you think they were going to take like 3 or 4 players in that 23 class. So you're expecting, this year has been, a little more transfer, more dependent, I guess, for Lady Vols than in years past, because you have 1 player you're adding as a recruit, at least 2 right now, the transfer portal, potentially a 3rd, but you're seems like you're fully expecting that to be more reversed next year, where you're going to be a lot more recruit heavy, and then you kind of maybe bring in a transfer if there's just the right one that pops in.
That and there's always the wild card of your own players.
Yeah.
I mean, you never know when a player's going to leave. I mean, the portal basically just means coaches have to be aware they can lose a player at any time, or they conversely can go gain a player. You try to build a culture where you can keep your team intact, but you have to be aware of the fact that while that's something to aspire to, it's not always going to be realistic, particularly if you get to a situation where you have a lot of players who want to play minutes and there's only 200 minutes a game, and Kelly runs a deep roster. I mean, she runs a deep rotation. You will get opportunities, but there always are going to be players who may think, okay, I should be playing more, and I want to go somewhere where I could. And I don't fault anybody if they ever reach that conclusion when they get to that point. And for Tennessee fans who, don't really like losing players, I'm like, well, look who Tennessee's adding. I mean, it's a 2-way street here. You can't be upset that a player left Tennessee, but then, be so happy that this player came to us. I mean, it's part of the game, but I call them emerging adults, but I mean, these are kids, especially the 18, 19-year-olds. They want a good environment. They want a good situation. And Kelly is very particular about the character of kids. I mean, she knows college kids are going to do college kids things. I'm not saying they're all coming here and being perfect and doing everything they're supposed to do. College kids will do college kids things. She played here. She knows college kids will do college kids things, but there's a whole other side of you. What is your character like in terms of how you interact with your own teammates? What are your academic goals? I mean, she's very big on academics, which is good. I mean, what 1% maybe? Or I mean, not even that. I mean, there's 100 and something players in this draft, 36 draft positions next week. There's only 36 selected. That international players will be drafted too. Mm-hmm. Third round kids don't rarely make a roster. Most of the second round doesn't. Somebody pointed out that a good chunk of the first round wasn't still on a roster by the time the season ended a year ago.
Wow.
You better get your degree. Mm-hmm. You better find out what you're going to do, because there are many, the likelihood that you will be a long-time professional basketball player is quite small. So Kelly's fully aware of the fact that these kids are here first and foremost to get their education. So she's looking for kids who take school seriously, take their academic, not that you have to be a 4.0 and an honor roll student, but that you put as much effort as you are capable of into your academics as you do your athletics.
Yeah, and that's always been the Lady of All way. I mean, Pat was always huge on that as well. Like always talking about, making sure you're not just at class, but you're in the front row of classes, especially for lecture hall stuff. Like that's always been the Lady of All way. So I'm glad that's being carried over into this new era of women's basketball for Tennessee, and just in general too. Like you said, with the transfer portal and stuff, like it's huge to make a big importance on academics, especially in the women's game, where unfortunately, it's not as you said, guaranteed if you're a first round pick. It's not as, even with the men's game, it's not as guaranteed if you're a first round pick that you're going to be, have a long career in the pros. But it's even more so the women's game, because there's less teams. There's just unfortunately less opportunity now, but there is more opportunity happening, which I am very happy about for professional women's basketball. So that'd be another off-season topic I think I would love to address, is kind of just looking at the growing game of women's basketball, just kind of women's athletics in general. But I do want to get you out here, Maria, because you've been fantastic on here again. I really appreciate you, just sharing your knowledge and everything and your perspective on it. So I knew there was no one more perfect to have on the show to wrap up the season and look ahead early on here in April for the off season. So again, I know everybody who is listening to this knows who you are and how to get your stuff, but let everybody know, what you have on Go Vols 247 and what you have, anything coming down the wire or anything you want to, kind of plug here for Lady Vol coverage.
Yeah, obviously Go Vols 247. That's where you'll find what I do on a regular basis all season long. I keep doing a weekly notebook. I'll do some softball, do some recruiting, of course. Knox TN today. Literally, I just started writing a new column for them. It's a hyper local news site here. They also do, I think, a broadsheet that they, I think, maybe send out once a quarter, but it's Knox, KNOX, TN, and today.com. And they're on Facebook and on the web. So I'm just doing a Lady Vols column once a week. I think I've done 3 for them now. The last one I did, a lot of not even non-sports people enjoyed it, because I pointed out how Tennessee fans have been gleefully, and I mean gleefully, tracking the fact that UConn and Geno Auriemma have not won a national title since Candace Parker got cut from the Olympic team in 2016. Now, they won in 2016 in April, and then by late April, the roster came out. Candace was not on it. And Tennessee fans have pointed out that they lost in 2017, 18, 19, of course, 20. There was no tournament, 21, and now 22. So over 6 years, it's been 5 defeats. And people, for whatever reason, enjoyed that column, because I was just pointing out that, keeping score. Tennessee fans are keeping a different score. And what they want now is to settle the score of all time and win another national title and get Tennessee back there. So for what, you never know when you write something what people are really going to respond to, but that's the one that people have responded to.
Oh yeah, I'm actually gonna link that in the description. I'm glad you brought it up, because I saw that people going crazy over that on social media. So I'm definitely gonna put that in the description, on the podcast description and on the YouTube description. So wherever you're watching / listening to this, you can click the link and check that out. It is definitely worth the read. And you're right. I mean, Vol fans, Lady Vol fans, both, like I think we all love and enjoy being a little petty, and like you said, keeping up with it and hating on the people who hate on Tennessee a lot. So I think you're right. Like I'm not surprised at all that one played well with the Vol fan base. So I'll link that in the description. But Maria, again, thank you so much, Maria, for hopping on. And
I agree. I'm still mad Peyton Manning didn't win the Heisman. I mean, I'll be mad about that forever.
Yeah, me too. And I was like 5 when that happened, but so like I like just growing up, like that's one of the things I remember people talking about all the time when I was a young kid is Peyton got cheated out of the Heisman, and he was the second Tennessee player to get cheated out of the Heisman. So I hope that, you know, if Hendon Hooker makes a Heisman run, he doesn't get cheated out of one also this year. So anyway, thank you so much, Maria. Thank you for all of you Lady Vol fans and Vol fans both who have been listening and watching along all season. We'll have plenty of off-season coverage. You know, it's April, beginning of April. We'll probably have some breaks here and there just because we can, and it's nice to have little breaks, but there's going to be plenty to talk about with both these teams, the men's and women's teams basketball at Tennessee. So be on the lookout for more stuff from Vol Basketball Fever and Lady Vol Basketball Fever here on YouTube and on the podcast as well. So again, signing off for Maria, I am Nathaniel. Please subscribe if you haven't already, like this video, or subscribe to the podcast, whatever you're doing and listening, however you're doing it. We would really appreciate that. But thank you all again. This has been another episode of the Lady Vol Basketball Fever podcast.